and there are 300 police blocking the protesters.
There is a specific sound a society makes when the social contract finally snaps. It's the sound of shattered glass at 127 different coordinates across the United Kingdom. Tonight, the official narrative has officially collapsed. While the leadership in Whitehall issues empty threats of punishment, the streets are delivering a much harsher verdict. We are witnessing the largest surge of civil friction in modern British history, as the Asylum accommodation network becomes a theatre of unprecedented force. From London to the northern towns, the question is no longer about policy, it's about the internal surrender of the state. With a record-low trust rating of -69%, Keir Starmer isn't just fighting a riot, he is fighting a meltdown of credibility that has turned the UK into a global cautionary tale.
To understand why the English warning is now a recognised phrase in Washington and beyond, you have to look at the maths of the mud. Every single day, the British Treasury burns over £8 million to house unregulated arrivals in 3- and 4-star hotels. While the state claims the cupboard is bare for the British pensioners' winter fuel allowance, it magically finds budget surpluses for private security, catered meals, and luxury rooms for undocumented males. This isn't an administrative error, it is what critics call a sovereign insult. The public has realised that the government isn't fixing the border, it is subsidising the breach. When a pensioner chooses between heating and eating, while a hotel window reflects the glow of civil unrest, the resentment burns faster than any fuel.
The most hideous part of this strategy, according to opposition leaders, is the long game being played in strategic constituencies. Why are the deportations not happening? Why are the flights to Africa grounded? Analysts suggest a cold, calculated institutional pivot. Every unregulated arrival housed in a taxpayer-funded room is being viewed as a constituency in training. The strategy appears to be a strategic electorate expansion, importing new voters to replace the disillusioned red wall that has already crumbled. By fast-tracking these arrivals towards citizenship, the administration is effectively gerrymandering the social fabric, ensuring a permanent dependency on the party that handed out the keys to the hotel rooms.
The irony of this anarchy is the man presiding over it. Keir Starmer built his career as the chief prosecutor, promising to smash the gangs with legal expertise. Instead, he has become the absentee landlord of a fractured nation. The criminal gangs aren't scared of the Prime Minister. They are emboldened by a system that prioritises de-escalation over enforcement. While the courts release violent offenders due to lack of space, the law-abiding citizen is monitored, audited, and taxed into submission. From the 16% surge in machete attacks to the return of grooming gangs in the north, the state has demanded total dependency on a force that is no longer allowed to reclaim the streets.
The fires at the 127 hotels may eventually be extinguished, but the sovereign deception has been shattered forever. We are witnessing a deadlock between an elite that thinks everything is a policy framework and a public that knows it's a survival crisis. The Prime Minister can talk about modernisation, but he cannot hide the fact that he has traded national defence for community tensions. The curiosity of the viewer shouldn't be about whether the government will fall. The credibility is already in the rubble. The question is, who will be left to answer the call when the English warning becomes a global reality? The last orders for the social contract have been called. The silence from Downing Street isn't a strategy, it's a surrender. Hundreds have been taken off London streets in a single blistering sweep. More than 900 arrests, executed in one coordinated operation, tearing through the West End with a force this city has not witnessed in years. And tonight, as police vans choke the narrow streets from Soho to Oxford Circus, one question hangs in the air. How long has this been festering beneath the lights of the capital's most famous district? It began before dawn. Moved fast, block by block, targeting mini-marts, vape shops, late-night takeaways. The very storefronts millions walk past every day without a second thought. Inside many of these units, investigators say, were the guts of a criminal economy. Illicit tobacco stacked behind false walls, cash piles hidden under noose floorboards, ghost-managed companies masking illegal labor and funneling dirty money through the system. By mid-morning, London's West End was no longer the polished postcard version the world imagines. It was a crime scene, sprawling, chaotic, and deeply uncomfortable.
Sources inside the operation describe it as the largest high-street crime purge in modern UK history. Nearly 2,800 premises were visited and more than £10 million in criminal proceeds seized. That includes millions of illegal vapes, mountains of contraband tobacco, over £500,000 in cash, and significant quantities of cannabis. The arrests, now sitting at over 920 nationwide, tell only part of the story. What shocked investigators was the scale of the criminal infrastructure hiding behind these ordinary shopfronts. Months of intelligence work pointed to networks using ghost directors, fake leases, and illegal workers to keep operations fluid and almost invisible. For a district known for tourists, nightlife, and theatres, this was a jarring reminder that beneath the neon lights lies a parallel economy that has been quietly expanding. For months, officials warned that dodgy shops were becoming fronts for organised crime, raking in billions from illicit goods while exploiting migrant workers. In a political climate already rattled by immigration debates, this crackdown lands like a grenade. Inside government, pressure is mounting. The Home Office, under scrutiny for rising illegal working raids and asylum pressures, now faces another storm. How did these networks become so deeply rooted in Britain's most heavily policed district? Security officials insist this West End sweep is not the final act. They call it Phase 2 of a nationwide intensification, with every police force in England and Wales now drawn in. Trading standards, HMRC, and immigration enforcement are moving in lockstep, trying to reclaim high streets that in some areas residents say they barely recognise anymore. Politically, the fallout is immediate. Labour MPs are demanding new powers to close rogue shops permanently. Reform UK is seizing the moment to argue that the government is soft on borders. Business owners, especially those who operate legitimately, fear this will fuel a climate of suspicion that punishes the innocent alongside the guilty. And through all of this, communities are asking how long these networks have operated unchecked. If so much criminal infrastructure existed in the heart of the capital, what does that say about towns where oversight is thinner?
Tonight, investigators are unravelling seized ledgers, forged IDs, cloned corporate document, and evidence of networks stretching far beyond London. Officials estimate organised crime generates £12 billion a year in Britain, money that disappears into offshore accounts and black market pipelines. This is more than a policing operation. It is a test of the high street's integrity, of Britain's border control, and of a political system struggling to reassert authority. If 900 arrests can happen in a single sweep, what else is still hiding in plain sight?
Police officers in Birmingham have been attacked with fireworks, fired at point-blank range, as if the city's streets had abruptly become a testing ground for chaos. The first explosions tore through the night with a violence no one anticipated, bursts of color followed by screams, sharp cracks ricocheting off tower blocks, and the unmistakable sense that something had shifted. And from that moment, the night did not unfold, it unraveled. What began as scattered flashes quickly hardened into a coordinated assault. Rockets were launched directly at officers, sparks hammered against shields. Police vans were forced to reverse under fire. Families watched from behind locked doors as sirens tangled with smoke. The city felt trapped in a moment it had not seen coming, unsure when it would end, and even more unsure why it had begun at all. Yet beneath the noise, a deeper question formed. Why Birmingham, and why now? It was never simply about the fireworks. It was about everything that had been simmering long before the first rocket flew. To understand tonight's eruption, we must look beyond the immediate clashes and into the wider reality Birmingham has lived with for months. The force policing this city is exhausted. Officers have spoken openly about endless overtime, slipping response times, and equipment that is aging faster than it can be replaced. Britain's front line has been stretched so thin that even routine calls now feel like triage. Birmingham, with its sprawling estates, youthful population, and rapidly shifting demographics, sits at the center of these pressures. Rising youth crime has left officers responding to incidents at a pace they can no longer sustain. Communities dealing with the double burden of economic hardship and migration pressures have become increasingly frustrated. And all of it has accumulated quietly, forming the dry ground upon which tonight's sparks landed. When police issued a Section 60 order granting expansive stop and search powers, it wasn't the beginning of control. It was an acknowledgement of how fragile that control had already become. And so, even as officers pushed back against the firework volleys, the deeper story was already taking shape. Birmingham wasn't simply reacting to violence. It was revealing the conditions that had made that violence possible. The scenes in Birmingham may feel shocking, but they are rooted in national tensions Britain has been trying to avoid confronting. Over the past year, the country witnessed some of the largest anti-immigration demonstrations in recent memory. Political rhetoric hardened, communities split over cultural, economic, and identity issues, and resentment, once scattered, began to consolidate. In Birmingham, those national pressures became personal. Rents rose sharply, food prices consumed savings, youth services already overstretched struggled to absorb growing needs. Mental health waiting lists lengthened to the point where help often arrived too late. Families found themselves juggling more stress than ever, while young people in particular slipped between the cracks. It is in this environment of uncertainty, frustration, and eroding trust that tonight's events found oxygen. Fireworks did not manufacture instability, they exposed it. Birmingham's eruption was not an anomaly, it was the visible surface of something deeper, the outward expression of pressures accumulating inside communities that feel increasingly disconnected from the institutions meant to serve them. And that truth is perhaps the most unsettling part of tonight's story. The violence was sudden, but the reasons behind it were not.
As the night unfolded, a second realization took shape, one far more consequential than the spectacle of flashing lights and burning debris. Britain's ability to respond to unrest is itself reaching a breaking point. Prisons across the country are at or near maximum capacity, leaving offenders cycling in and out of custody with alarming speed. Court backlogs have grown so vast that justice has slowed to a crawl, and officers, already stretched thin, are left questioning whether the deterrence they rely upon still holds. For criminals, hesitation becomes opportunity. When word spreads that the system is overwhelmed, that consequences may be delayed or even avoided, the boundaries that once kept order intact begin to soften. And when policing becomes reactive rather than preventative, neighborhoods sense the shift immediately. Birmingham exposed this shift in real time. The fireworks were a symptom, the response, or lack of it, was the diagnosis. Tonight's violence spiraled not because officers were absent, but because the structure supporting them could no longer absorb another shock. And that raises a question the entire country must now grapple with. If this is what one night of concentrated pressure looks like, what happens when the pressures grow larger?
In the aftermath, attention inevitably turns to Westminster. But at a time when cities like Birmingham are grappling with rising instability, the political spotlight sits elsewhere, on renegotiations with Europe, on defending migration policy, on budget disputes and party infighting. The distance between political priorities and street-level reality has rarely felt wider. Residents watching the violence unfold want clarity. Officers want reinforcement. Communities want certainty. Instead, they hear familiar phrases about monitoring the situation, statements that acknowledge unrest without addressing the conditions beneath it. It leaves a sense of hesitation at the very moment the country needs decisiveness. And this gap between what government says and what the street feels is where instability grows. Birmingham's eruption is not just a policing failure or a community strain. It is a political warning. If leadership cannot move at the pace of crisis, then the crisis will set the pace for the country.
As the smoke fades and the city returns to a brittle quiet, the true meaning of tonight becomes clearer. Britain is not collapsing, but it is straining. The forces bearing down on the country, migration pressure, economic anxiety, youth unrest, Policing fatigue, overcrowded prisons, and deepening political division are converging in ways that make pockets of instability more likely, not less. Birmingham is not an outlier. It is a preview, a reminder that the line between order and disorder is far thinner than it once was, and that the pressures shaping modern Britain are beginning to surface in unpredictable and explosive ways. So now Britain faces a question it can no longer delay. Was tonight's violence a momentary rupture, destined to fade with the morning light, or was it an early sign of a country approaching the limits of what its institutions can contain? Because what happened in Birmingham was more than chaos. It was a message, and whether the nation listens will determine what comes next.